Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to an interview with the author of Shakespeare's Star Wars, Ian Doescher. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I am so happy to have you here. I've been reading your books since they started coming out. I think, of course, Star Wars, The New Hope 1 came out first, and as somebody who has always loved Shakespeare, it's just like a perfect Venn diagram of my two interests. And also, because it's an adaptation, you're allowed to take, I guess, some artistic license with with the stories themselves a little bit to explore maybe more of the POV, but spoken because of monologues and soliloquies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a Star Wars fan, that's been the most fun thing about these adaptations is getting inside characters' heads and imagining what it is that they're feeling and thinking in the moments where we don't necessarily hear from them in the movies. We're just sort of seeing their faces being dramatic. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And even with the, novelizations where we get a little bit more of, say, potentially characters' POVs, it's never quite as beautiful as how you do it with your monologues. They're so good. And I've loved what you've done with like R2-D2, his like almost sinister Iago like plotting, and the haikus that Yoda does. They're just all so wonderful because Yoda's speech is already sort of feels Shakespearean in some ways. So to do something different was just wonderful.
And it took a while to come around to doing haikus. There were a bunch of different things I was thinking about for Yoda. And once I had the haiku idea, I was like, I think this is it. I think this is the right one.
You're also coming to the end of an era as well as Star Wars is, because this has been a 9-book play, a journey for you that like... You've been along for the ride to like adapt every single one of the saga.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think it's only sort of just now hitting me, and I'm kind of starting to process it because these books, because they happen so quickly, are sort of a whirlwind, and it's sort of now dawning on me like, yeah, wow, I've done 9 of these, and now I've done the entire Skywalker saga, and that's a lot, and it's been nothing but joy, but here we are at the end of it.
I made a joke to you on Twitter once. Well, not really. It was somebody had asked what kind of Star Wars movie, anything that you would want. And I said, I would love to take any Shakespearean play and adapt it for Star Wars and just make it like way, way, way in the past. So it feels like new. And you were like, I'm in. Because like so many of the themes and, the tragedy specifically, but also the comedy, feels so Star Wars. And, why is that? Why is it so similar?
I mean, I think it's really that any story, any good story has... Human emotions haven't changed over time. Like the feelings that we feel, fear or love or sadness or, wonder or whatever it is, right? These things have been with us for centuries and forever, right? And so I think that good stories draw on those same emotions, whether we're talking about Hamlet or Star Wars, right? And so I've actually, over the years, people ask me about like different things I might adapt, and the like real secret is that I think just about anything would work as a Shakespearean adaptation if it's a good story, right? I mean, if you have a good story with rich characters who are, struggling through things and feeling things, I think it's going to adapt to Shakespeare because that's what Shakespeare did also. It's
also, in some ways, Star Wars plugged into popular media and popular storytelling, and Shakespeare was trying to do that. Like we uplift him a lot more than he was maybe meant to be uplifted in the olden days, because it was the popular media of the time was going to the theater and seeing these shows, and they would produce them in rapid succession because people wanted to see things, new every week or every 2 weeks, because I've already seen that one, and that's why there was a lot of drama, heightened drama and heightened emotion, because that was their entertainment. So it's like, the things that we love about reality TV shows when people get into fights or arguments or there's love involved. That's what Shakespeare plugged into, these heightened emotions, because he really, really wanted to, plug into, hey, this is what's going to get the butts in the seats or the groundlings on the floor kind of thing.
And I've been saying for years that I think if Shakespeare were alive today, he would be writing things like Star Wars. He would be writing the popular entertainment of our day.
Yeah, exactly. Because he plugged into that, and it was what sold, and
for sure.
And it was popular from, people on the street all the way up to the Queen and the kings.
Yep. I mean, just like today, right? Star Wars has permeated the world in a way that almost nothing else has. It's hard to think of many other things that are known worldwide and loved worldwide in the same way.
And also speak to, who we are as humans in some ways, like with the ties to the hero's journey and, story in and of itself does that, but it plugs into it in a more intentional way than many stories produced do, because that was Lucas's intention. And, that in and of itself is really fascinating. I think I heard you speak about this before, but that writing and speaking in iambic pentameter is very easy for you. It was almost like a weird gift that you have.
Well, it's something that I've loved verse for a very long time. And, I grew up on Dr. Seuss, who is so tight with his verse. And then when I started learning in high school about poetic feet and meter and all these things, it all made a lot of sense to me. And I was the kind of nerd who would just write things in verse for fun, over the years. And so, writing William Shakespeare's Star Wars, the first book, it wasn't the first time I'd written iambic pentameter. And the great thing about it is the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And so, yeah, it really is. I hate to say that writing in iambic pentameter is easy for me, but it is. It is just kind of just there naturally, and the lines come to me a lot faster than they do for people who aren't used to it.
Yeah. You've almost trained your brain to think that way, and with practice too, because hey, you've got many books now out in this style. What is your favorite way to experience this work? Have you seen others do play readings of it? We've of course heard the audiobooks for a few of the productions. I think it was the original trilogy as well as the Force Doth Awaken. The Force Doth Awaken, yes. Yeah. Those were done incredibly well because they had full cast and sound effects and things.
Yeah, I think for me that's just about the height of the way I've experienced my own stuff. Those audiobooks are really so well done. We also were able to do in May, Quirk Books, my publisher, had this idea to do some. They called it Pop Shakespeare Live, and so we did some Zoom performances of snippets of a few different books, and so we did some scenes from William Shakespeare's Star Wars on May the 4th, and we did it with this theater company that popped up at the start of coronavirus called The Show Must Go Online, and they are led by Robert Miles, who is just a really brilliant and creative director. And so he was able to bring some of these things to life. And that even brought this other dimension, to it that the audiobooks don't have, which is sort of the visual component also. And and so that was a lot of fun as well. So I would say between that and the audiobooks, those are,
your two favorite experiences with your work.
That and having Ian McDiarmid read a Palpatine speech at Celebration back in 2014, I think it was, or 2015. It doesn't actually quite get much better than that as a Star Wars fan.
Ian reading Ian.
Right.
So I love the title, The Merry Rise of Skywalker. as how meta and thoughtful it is, you know, with the history of Falstaff for the Merry Wives of Windsor. Was that intentional, that, you know, Falstaff being a character that was killed off in a previous play and brought back to life inexplicably in the Merry Wives of Windsor because the Queen commanded it?
I mean, I think you pointed that out on Twitter, and if it wasn't you, it was somebody else. No, I wish I could say that level of thought had gone into it. The reality is that the title we came up with, or we came up with various titles basically shortly after the title was announced. So that's, you know, months before the movie actually comes out. And you know, we thought about things like Skywalker Doth Rise or things like that. But we, you know, to a certain extent, you don't want to reuse things that you had already used. I liked what we had done with some of the other pop Shakespeare stuff I've done, like with Much Ado About Mean Girls and Taming of the Clueless, where we are using Shakespearean titles to actually sort of inform the titles of these books. And so that was playing into it a little bit too, right? I thought about, well, maybe we should just call this one All's Well That Ends Well, right? But then we had happened on this idea of Merry Rise of Skywalker, and that was before we had any idea whether or not it was going to be Merry or not. You know, and there are plenty of people right now who are, you know, I think chafing a little bit at the title, saying Mary. What does that mean? You know, it's not Mary. But anyway. Well,
I mean, it does have Palpatine come back, who is a fan favorite. So now you can own it. You can be like, that's right. It wasn't intentional, but it was in there subconsciously.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. I also love that you, you know, acknowledge that there is, you know, some tragedy to this story and combine it not only with the comedy involved, but, you know, pull heavily on Romeo and Juliet, especially with the star-crossed lovers idea, because we do get that with Ben and Ray, you know, the enemies, you know, and maybe Much Ado About Nothing would have been better because of how much they're enemies, but it doesn't end up happily for them, unfortunately, in the end.
The Romeo and Juliet parallel is just so plain in that scene in The Rise of Skywalker. You know, whenever you have somebody dying as somebody else is coming back to life, and then there's a kiss involved, and I mean, it's just, you know, it feels very much like Romeo and Juliet. And so, yeah, that was something that I sort of instantly glommed onto and wanted to bring out.
I also loved that you wrote a scene for the character that John Williams played in the movie, because I actually complained about this I'm like, they put John Williams in the movie and we just get to see him for like 2 seconds. We don't even get to like they did this nice homage with the stuff behind him, but we didn't really get him like to say anything, and you gave that to us with his exceptional, like, talking about his job almost. And it's very meta and smart, because he's kind of talking about how he, you know, watches everybody pass through, and, you know, he has established the rules of certain things, kind of like the themes. And one of the things I do on this podcast is actually I have a composer that comes on named Chris Carew, and we actually analyze his work and the music of Star Wars. And I showed her this page of it, and she was like, that is brilliant, because of you've also embedded the theme of Star Wars, so the main theme, into that paragraph. It's beautiful.
Thank you. I mean, I wanted to do something to, you know, a silent cameo works in a movie, but doesn't work in a book. You know, yeah. I needed to do something to draw him out a little bit. And so I was trying to, again, this is one of those cases where, like, this character doesn't actually say anything. All we get is him sort of giving a dirty look to the good guys as they walk by. And so I was trying to sort of think, okay, well, he's an old guy. He's a bartender. We know from A New Hope that bartenders don't like droids. So maybe that's just a thing. We don't know why, but that's just a thing, right? And so maybe he can sort of be fussing about them. But at the same time, I was like, I have to work in John Williams' music somehow. And so I did have this idea to sort of embed the notes through the O's, the capital O's and the dots above the I's throughout the speech. And it was one of these things where I was like, I don't know if this will work. I don't know if I can actually do this. I guess we'll find out.
I set myself a challenge.
Yeah, which I like doing. And so I tried it, and it worked out okay. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to I do love a good writing challenge, and that was definitely one. And hopefully it pays tribute to his cameo.
I think it does. And it I don't know, it made me happy reading the acknowledgements and not realizing, and then going back and reading it and like understanding more how purposeful it was. So I love when there's intention behind choices, and this is like a very beautiful, tribute to him. So thank you, because it's the end of his journey too with Star Wars as well, which is
right.
Kind of not that you're done. I'm sure you'll come back when there's more to write.
And that was one of we don't often make Easter eggs explicit, but that was one where I was like, if I don't talk about it and point it out, no, like there are other Easter eggs that people will realize are there, but other ones, like, you just will never know it's there if you don't, if you're not told that it's there. And so that one I felt like had to be sort of explained.
Yeah. As well as like a little bit of the Romeo and Juliet. Like, was this purposeful? Yes, it was. Yes.
Right. That's right.
So are Easter eggs something that you come up with? Is it something that you're like working with your editor with? Like, how do you kind of come up with those things? Because Easter eggs are very, very Star Wars in and of themselves, but usually they kind of play a purpose to say like, hey, I see you, longtime fan. I'm paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, they're all me. They're not something I consult with my editor or with Lucasfilm on. I would say that in the last few books, both Star Wars and not, there's been a little more nervousness around actually making references to other properties, like a Star Trek reference wouldn't fly anymore. And there is a Star Trek reference in Verily a New Hope. And so I'm a little bit more constricted in what I can do. But basically, I mean, those started from the first book because I was like, hey, I'm writing a book. Who knows if I will ever get to write another book? And so I'll just throw a few things in here because I think it's fun, and sometimes they are pre-planned and sometimes they're just sort of suggested by the moment. In Phantom Menace, when you have Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan suddenly facing off against Darth Maul, and I'm like, okay, well, I just have to, like, Liam Neeson has to give his Taken speech right here. Like, how would that, it's just too perfect, right? I mean, there are just some Easter eggs that are like, it's just too perfect not to do it here.
Yeah. And it ends up being homage in some ways because you're changing like the actual language, etc. But it feels the same and it has the same kind of through line. I was wondering if you would be interested in reading a few pieces or parts from
Sure.
The Merry Rise of Skywalker. I think that we have talked about doing both Ben's, I guess, his atonement monologue. Do you have names for them?
I don't have names for them. So this first soliloquy, this is right after Kylo Ren has had his encounter with the ghost of Han Solo. And he throws his lightsaber into the water, and then he turns around and Han is gone. And this is what Kylo Ren says. Now I have taken heart, thou vanishest. Sweet spirit, I would hold more talk with thee. This visitation marks a turning point, the end of one life as another starts. I must be strong, remember my first call, and shun the folly that consumed my life. The years spent with the vile First Order shall become the nadir of a human life, the lowest rung upon my ladder tall, the ebbing of the ocean of my days, the bass notes of the symphony of time. However long my strand of life shall be, ere fate ordains to clip it and release my life into the force forevermore, I shall exist to bring light to the world, deliver hope to those too long oppressed, make recompense for all the wrong I've done. The work beginneth now, as I proceed to Exegol to face the Emperor. Defeating him must be the initial deed in making up for Kylo Ren's foul works. The name doth leave a rotten taste inside my mouth. What vanity to turn away the name my loving parents proffered me. No evil knave, no longer Kylo Ren. I turn away from he who I was then. From now I am a Solo once again, the son of Han and Leia. I am Ben.
Oh, I am Ben. That's so good.
He's Ben. And then from then on, I think in the book, he is referred to as Ben and not Kylo Ren.
Not Kylo Ren, yeah. What was really important for you to get across in that section?
I think the most important thing for me was this sense that he feels like he needs to make up for the things he's done.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get that explicitly in the movie, except through his actions, partially because he doesn't talk. I think from that moment forward, he doesn't talk in the movie except to say "ouch"
Yes.
and so we don't really know what's going on for him. And I wanted to give him this sense. You don't
run into hell without like wanting to make a difference, you know?
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I wanted to give him this sense of like, I know I've done things I shouldn't have done, and now I want to make up for it.
Yeah. And it's a very powerful speech. This is one of the ones that really got me, Misty, like, because I feel a lot of empathy for Kylo Ren and Ben Solo. Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, they're the same person. But, you know, I feel a lot of empathy for him being stuck. Like, he really hasn't had a lot of choice his whole existence but to be, you know, trapped in an evil snare web by Palpatine in the end, we find out. And like to have finally been released from that is very powerful. And to have such a singular focused mind on what he needs to do is very powerful. And I think that that's one of the most powerful moments in the movie is when he turns back to the light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Did you also want to read the section kind of at the end with Ben and Rey? And this is the one that more specifically pulls on the language of Romeo and Juliet, especially that end scene.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you want to start that? Do you want to start at his sort of long monologue, or where do you want to start?
Let me check. Sorry, I didn't.
I'm on bottom of page 154 would be a place to start, or we could start somewhere on 155.
I have the PDF open, which means it's a little jumpy. Okay. 154. Yeah, let's start at when he comes back on 154.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. That's perfect. When he enter Ben Solo through trapdoor.
I mean, for as long as we've got it there on the stage, we might as well use it. So this is what Ben says. Once fallen, broken, yea, but not yet dead. I grope and fumble, finding purchase on the rock, that I may to the scene once more, although I sense the enemy is gone. He climbs into the throne room and stumbles to Rey's side, sitting next to her. So soon turned ally, Rey, and too soon gone. Why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean, abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour? For fear of that, I still will stay with thee, and never from this palace of dim night depart again. Here will I remain with worms that are thy chambermaids. Oh, here will I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Eyes, look your last. He takes her in his arms. Arms, take your first and last embrace of her. Still now thy thoughts, Ben. Join her in the force. Whatever life I have within me yet, thus proffer I to her that she may live, and in full recompense for who I've been and what I've done, and wherefore I did so. Ben puts one hand on Rey's side and transfers life to her through the force. Rey revives and puts her hand on his.
Oh, comfortable touch, where is my foe? I do remember well where I should be, and there I am, with Ben here by my side. To Ben, Ben, Thou didst come and saved me from death's grip.
She kisses him. They smile at each other. Thus from my lips, by thine, my sin is purged. Ben dies.
My life, I see, hath been his timeless end. Oh, it's so sad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad. And I mean, there's a lot of, if for people who don't necessarily recognize it immediately, there's a lot of Romeo and Juliet in there. When he first happens on her, I mean, there are like 8 or 10 lines that are borrowed from Romeo and Juliet. So I was really, really trying to hammer that home.
Why was that important?
Well, I just think, I mean, anytime I have these real things where I feel like there are really strong parallels between Shakespeare and Star Wars, I guess I would almost say that, like, the stronger I think the parallel is, the more lines I'm going to borrow in some ways, right? And so the one that's popped into my head is, Luke's speech before the final Death Star battle in Verily a New Hope, is modeled in a lot of ways after Henry V's speech before the Battle of Agincourt. And so there are, a good number of lines that he uses here and there throughout the speech that parallel with Shakespeare's text. And I don't know, I guess in some ways it sort of feels like reaching across that expanse of time and different, stories and that sort of thing, and really sort of linking arms with, with another text, and saying, hey, we're doing this together. This is a shared moment that we're all sort of feeling right here.
Like that these experiences and these stories of tragedy and loss and do affect us, and that they come up again and again for reasons. Why, I'm wondering why this is like, so humanistic in some ways, because like it feels like we sometimes want to cry. Why is star-crossed lovers like such a thing that we pull onto ourselves?
I mean, as
storytellers.
That's a good question, and I don't know that I have an answer. I mean, I guess maybe because love is in some ways one of the ultimate emotions, and so the idea that there would be something getting in the way of that kind of instantly makes for a good story, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I mean, I actually didn't know until I think it was until The Force Doth Awaken actually came out. I think it wasn't until then that I sort of learned about the like Finray camps and the Raylo camps and that sort of I didn't realize how big those sort of worlds were and that sort of thing. And so I guess I wouldn't go so far as to say that I think that Ray and Ben would actually be lovers, right? Mm-hmm. In a different world. But that there is this connection that they sense there, right? And and I mean, frankly, I don't know how I feel about the kiss at the end of that movie. It's an interesting moment, right?
Yeah.
But because it exists, it feels like, okay, well, then let's set up this dynamic where, if not lovers, at least it's these two people who have a profound connection with each other, and they both know it, they both recognize it, and they both realize that death is sort of surrounding that connection that they have. Now, she doesn't know in that moment, when they kiss, she doesn't, I think, know that he's about to die. It would almost be a really different scene if she kissed him after he died or something like that, right? But so I don't know. To me, it's kind of a mystery of like, what would Ray and Ben have been had things gone differently? I don't know.
Yeah, I struggle with that too, because it almost like, and that's to the original text, it almost like tries to be like, hey, what do you want to see in this movie? And that's a struggle for an audience if you're not clearly defining like, okay, what are you trying to say, movie? Like
it's true. Yeah, and I mean, actually, that is, I would say, there's not a whole lot of ambiguity we're left with at the end of this movie, but that is one of those pieces, I think, that is still out there. It's like, what was that? What is that?
I mean, so they killed the emperor, but did they get rid of the First Order?
Well, actually, you're right.
Is evil gone? You know, I actually
what's going on with Finn? Actually,
yeah.
Let me strike that comment from the record. There's definitely ambiguity at the end of this movie.
Yeah, and I struggle with it personally because it's like, this is was it purposeful to say like the struggle always continues? And I don't know that that's the ending that I particularly want. And it and many people that I speak to are like, well, it begs the question, like, what happens next? But it was that purposeful at the end of a 9-movie arc? I don't know. I don't know.
It's hard because I think as a storyteller, to actually sort of wrap up every loose end perfectly is nearly impossible, right?
Oh yeah,
and it also is like, I mean, the thing now that's popping into my head is Into the Woods, the Stephen Sondheim musical.
Oh,
I don't know if you know that at all, but
yeah,
like,
I do, yeah.
Basically, so basically, like the first half ends with all these fairy tales reaching their like happy conclusion. Did I say the first act? I meant to say the first act. I don't know what act you said.
You said the first half, which
okay. Well, that's also correct. The first act ends, and then the second act is like,
but okay, everything went wrong.
What? Yeah, I mean, right. It's like what happens after life ends, quote unquote, happily ever after, and I guess it is in some ways truer to human life that like, except in death, things don't really end, right? So like, Ray and Finn and Poe are going to go on and have more life, plenty of more life. They're all young, and so like, I don't know. So it's dissatisfying maybe as a moviegoer, but also in some ways truer to human life. I don't know. It's a tricky one.
It is, yeah, and I think you do a good job of the speech at the end to say like, oh yeah, there's still adventures and things on the horizon for Ray, even though she we can't clearly tell that in the movie. There is kind of hope in her, where she's going to go next, which is nice.
Yeah.
You handle the force bond scenes or the force time communication really interestingly. You have stage directions where one or the other will like walk onto the stage and then they're talking to each other, so it's like they're in the force bond time where they can only see each other. And then I loved how you did that. That was really great.
Well, thank you. That's one of those moments that, it's so easy to do in movies, but like when you think about how would you actually stage this in a theater, it is tricky because it's like, this is how would you get across the sense that they are in different places and yet they're communicating? And yeah, so that is, I feel like, been sort of a challenge with this book and the last, because that's where we see that connection between them.
So moving a little bit away from the saga itself and into my Twitter question, which is, if you could adapt a Shakespearean, play or one of Shakespeare's works directly into the Star Wars universe and make it work, which would you choose? Why? How would you do it?
One that I've thought about doing, actually not with Star Wars, though I think it would work well, but I've thought about actually doing it with Star Trek, is The Tempest, right? Where you'd have somebody sort of marooned on a planet, and then they, through various means, there would be people brought to that planet, and sort of mystical, magical things would start happening to everybody there. And in the end, the person would figure out how to get off the planet, right? And so The Tempest. The Tempest is one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, and so that would be another reason for me to want to do it. And it also has all those sort of mythical themes. It's hard to imagine. Because it's Star Wars, right? It's hard to imagine taking a comedy, which The Tempest. Tempest, I guess, is has elements of comedy, but it's sort of more fantasy, But it's hard to imagine something like Much Ado About Nothing being taken.
I think that's perfect. The end, because it's the end of a war, and it's like what happens after. And there's all of these politics, and it like some terrible stuff happens like during the course of Much Ado About Nothing, but it ends happily. And that's one thing that like I think some people forget. Like George is always like, you have to give kids hope at the end. And
Right.
and that's very much what the comedies do from Shakespeare is like it's like, no, it was really okay in the end, everybody. It's okay. We went through all these hard times because they're terrible when, like, the comedies, people go through terrible things, like, during the course of them. It's not all just fun and games.
Absolutely. And I've said to one of my good friends, I've been like, sometimes I just want a Star Wars movie that's just about like daily life on one of these planets. Like what is it? So maybe taking a Shakespearean plot into one of those would be a way to do that, where there's not the stakes of the galaxy, but it's just like, hey, this is us leading our lives and falling in love. And yeah.
Well, I actually think that there's more of a place for Shakespeare in the Mandalorian period of time because of how much we've learned about their structure. It really leans into the Italian city-state period of time with, like, hey, there's a duke or there's, a prince. There's a lot of like, royalty in the galaxy far, far away, aristocratic spheres. Like we have Count Dooku, who's literally the duke of an entire planet. And that really leans into the concepts and the period of time that Shakespeare writes about, like with Venice specifically, and the other cities that Verona, etc., that he's tying into during the Renaissance. And the politics that you could get on a planet or on like a people like the Mandalorians in like, I don't know, the quote unquote medieval times of Star Wars could be really, really interesting because you have this cool dynamic of also having a ton of art built into that culture, but also sort of this militaristic sense in there. So you could have politics in there, and I think that it would play out quite well.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, and it's interesting as you're saying that. I mean, I think George Lucas tried to do that a bit with the prequels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bit of tragic hero in the form of Anakin, right? Like,
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the whole first 6 movies are like the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, right? I mean, like that's almost textbook. So,
yeah. I mean, and like especially the fall, because like that's him, being overcome with pride, and it ties in a lot with Greek tragedy, but also specifically, the pride that the hero feels that we get in Shakespearean tragedy, and how that ends up being his downfall.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Which is why, I mean, Revenge of the Sith is far and away my favorite of the prequels.
Yeah, because of all the heightened emotion, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, and the moment, I mean, the scenes around Order 66 are, for me, some of the like most emotional scenes in any of the movies. So
yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear that you had come up with the name pretty much after that Celebration announcement. Were you given the script early? Did you have to wait for the movie to come out to start writing? Like,
yeah, I have to wait. So I'm there on opening night with everybody else experiencing the movie. It's been my practice for the sequel series to see the movie 3, 4, 5 times in the first few days and then start writing. It is sort of a crash course in what this movie is all about, and I don't get anything early.
You're like got your little notepad, like
right, exactly, yeah.
I know people that do that for the music. They're like listening in the theater for the cues, for the themes that are coming out of the music, and literally in the dark with their little notepads, like taking solfege like notes.
Right. Yep.
To understand everything. So your experience is very similar in that, like, you sit in the theater and like think about, okay, what are you trying to get out of this, and start to form things? And then did you start writing right away for The Merry Rise of Skywalker, or did you have to wait a little bit to like look at any information that was given to you?
So no, I'm starting pretty much immediately. I mean, within a week of the movie coming out, I'm starting writing, because my deadline is generally for these three has been like the end of January, when the movie comes out mid-December, right? So it's very fast. And I've relied on the DK visual dictionary to the movies, because that gives a lot of background information on what different characters are called.
What is this snake named?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there were a few things, I've worked enough with Lucasfilm now that I was able to send an email about a few things to their story group and be like, hey guys, I'm working on the manuscript for this. Here's a couple, like in some cases it's like, what did C-3PO say right here? I think he said this, but that doesn't seem right. And like, what is this thing called? And I asked about the, because it wasn't in the visual dictionary, I asked what the, machine that the Emperor is strapped into is called, right? And so that was able to put that in my book, and which is the Omen, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Omen harness.
Yeah.
So that it's things, it's details like that I'm able to I hope fill out the book for people who want that level of detail, and for everybody else it can just be like something they gloss over.
I saw some people being really happy that you included the Omen harness. So I think that there are people who get different layers of things out of Star Wars, and that those sorts of things, the details are awesome, and with the adaptation to Shakespeare's Star Wars. When you take on one of these, like for example, if you were to take on, I don't know, Solo or Rogue One, what do you think about, like, when you're like looking at the piece? Are you like, trying to think about the themes you want to have come out? Like, what are the moments that, I guess kind of tell me how the sausage is made in getting a point, the movie to breathe as a Shakespearean Star Wars?
Yeah. So in terms of broader things, right? If I were doing Rogue One, which I would love to do, because
you're like, hey,
Rogue One is high up there for me among Star Wars movies. And so if I were doing Rogue One, broadly speaking, like I would start thinking about, okay, are there things that I want to do with characters' speech patterns to give them something unique, right? So with the sequel series, Rey has these monologues that are acrostic poems, and Poe uses references to Edgar Allan Poe poems and things like that. And so those were things that I did. So I would be thinking about things like that. I would also be making sure that each main character gets at least one soliloquy, because I want there to be, I don't want to only be hearing from one character or two characters. We hear a lot in the sequel series from Rey, but I also want to know what's Finn thinking right now, what's Poe thinking right now, and so there'd be some of that, and then just, I mean, in terms of really how the sausage gets made, right? Then it's like, okay, let's start watching the movie, right? And okay, here's the first line of dialogue, and it, like, at first it's almost like a translation project. How does this line of dialogue translate into iambic pentameter using some of Shakespeare's vocabulary and his literary devices, that sort of thing? And is there anything I want to add in here that might be special, or it might give some, clue as to how they're, how somebody's thinking?
K2SO's asides would be epic.
Oh, they would be fantastic. Yeah. It would be so much fun. So it's all that kind of thing, right? I look for facial expressions that actors make in the movies, particularly sometimes when it's a side character and you may not even notice the face that they make, right? But like if an actor is making a choice and really reacting to something, well, let's give that character an aside to see, like, what are they thinking right there, right? There's an example from Back to the Future, because one from Star Wars isn't coming up immediately, but in Back to the Future, in the first scene in 1955, when Marty sort of starts sticking up for George in front of Biff and his gang, George at first like Crispin Glover gives this look that when Biff starts making fun of Marty, Crispin Glover as George McFly gives this look of like, oh yeah, see, I'm part of their gang too. I can make fun of him too, right? Like he does this brilliant performance where he's like trying desperately to be on the side of the bullies instead of being the one picked on again. And so I brought that out in the text because I want to draw out those moments.
Yeah. And I think that really comes clearly through because you got to deal with Adam Driver's like very expressive face in, all three sequel trilogy movies. And of course, Daisy Ridley's amazing acting. And why are acrostic poems, not that I'm very familiar with that form of verse, why do they lean so well towards Ray?
Well, I don't know that they necessarily lean so much toward Ray. It was that when I first started writing my version of The Force Awakens, I was thinking, okay, I want to do something special for Ray. What can I do? And immediately the thought was, okay, there's all these sort of fan theories about her parentage and who she might be descended from. And so I want to address those in some way, but I want to do it in sort of an oblique way. And that's when I started developing, okay, this idea of acrostics where she would have these speeches, long speeches that were an acrostic where she is starting to think about, where you realize that sort of the subtext, literally almost, is that she is thinking about, or making suggestions about who she might be and who she might be descended from, and that sort of thing. And it turned into, and then those acrostic speeches themselves. So I'm just going to read you really fast, if it's okay. She has 7 acrostic speeches in The Force Doth Awaken, and they all form. Each one of them forms a line of iambic pentameter, and they all go together in these rhyming AB lines. And so this is the sort of 7 acrostics that you would experience if you put them all together. Perchance I am some ancestor or child of him, the fabled Jedi Obi-Wan. I could be kin to Skywalker, so mild, or mayhap child of Leia and her Han. 'Tis possible I by the Force was styled, or kin of other Jedi now far gone. My story is by mystery compiled. Right? So I'm getting across this mystery about who she is, but I'm doing it in a way that you're not going to, unless you go to the work of sussing out those acrostics, you're not going to even know it's there.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like the way to address it, because Rey herself, the character, knows who her parents are. She doesn't know she's descended of Palpatine, but we also don't see her in we don't see her in the first movie for sure, I think, worrying about who she might be descended from either, or worrying who her parents might be.
No, I think that was very much like fans worrying about her.
Right, totally. And so I guess my point is, I think it would have been inappropriate for her to have those words that I just said actually spoken as her character, because that's not what she was thinking of, right? But to sort of set it a level back in this acrostic Easter egg, I think was a way I could do it, I guess. Yeah.
So was that something that you were thinking about? You're like, who is she in that?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't too worried about it. I actually liked the idea after The Last Jedi that she was just nobody.
Yeah.
Because I felt like it sort of gave this hope, this idea that, hey, anybody could grow up and be Rey, right? And they don't have to be descendant from somebody special. I don't know that it was plaguing my mind, but I knew it was out there. And anytime there's a big fan thing out there, I want to make sure it gets addressed in the books, right? Like Han shooting first, right? You can't write that scene. I don't feel like I could write that scene and not address that in some way.
And, your awareness of all the relationship stuff, you're like, oh, I guess Romeo and Juliet does fit because also some people see this too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's really smart because it plugs in kind of, because it's an adaptation, it plugs into, in some ways, popular fandom of the Star Wars community too.
Right. And I mean, and who am I writing these books for, right? I mean, I'm writing these books.
People who like Star Wars and Shakespeare. It's a very specific Venn diagram.
It's true. Yeah. I know that like, I mean, Star Wars fans have been in general so positive and welcoming of my books, which I'm so grateful for. And so, it feels like I am also a Star Wars fan. And so I want to be sort of talking about the things that other fans are talking about. And I just
do you know
books.
the demographics like on like your readership? Like, is it mostly women? Is it like, mostly older fans, younger fans? Like, do you know any of those?
No, I don't. No, I don't at all. I know that like just anecdotally from sort of people who I talk with and that sort of thing, like that, that the biggest chunk is Star Wars fans, and then there's Shakespeare fans after that. And of course there are the people who are natural overlaps. But there's Shakespeare fans, there's then theater people, there's also teachers, right? So like there's sort of groups that tend to be attracted to these books. And Star Wars fans are biggest among them. But within that, I don't know like women or men or older or younger. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. What are you most proud of about writing all of these saga books and completing everything?
What am I most proud of? I mean, I guess the two things that leap to mind. I'm proud to have done all 9 movies. I don't think there's another author out there who has done Star Wars books who has written an adaptation of all 9. And
I think the closest is Patricia C. Reed, who did the middle grade adaptations of the prequels. She did 3.
Right.
So
right. Yeah. And there are certainly people who have done multiple versions of different movies. Right. And so I like that. I've
seen the whole thing.
Completed the whole thing. Yeah. And there was discussion, like we were sure we were not going to do the prequels when Quirk Books and I were working on the original trilogy. Like for a long time, we were like, yeah, of course we're not going to do the prequels. Of course we're not. And then the original trilogy was a success, and I had young people who had grown up with the prequels as their Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
Coming to me at events saying, please do the prequels, please, 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 and so we were like, yeah, let's do the prequels. And so, yeah, so I am really happy to have done all of them. I mean, I think the other thing is I've given myself lots of challenges over the years, like lots of big moments where I'm like, I don't know if I can do this, and this is going to work, like the John Williams character speech, and I like that I have continued to give myself challenges and have continued to meet them. So I don't know. That's just as a writer, and specifically as like the kind of writer I want to be, and the kind of writers I enjoy. I like that I've done some of those things.
Now I want to see a Mandalorian season 1 adaptation. Like Mandalorian 1, like it would be like, Henry, but it's not an unhappy story. It ends up happily. That's
I mean, it could be so. Yeah, I mean, Mandalorian would be
because the verbiage itself is very it's different than they speak in a non-standard way in it a little bit already. It would fit.
Yeah. It would be a lot of fun. I'm
seeing way more soliloquy because like there's like entire episodes where there's almost no talking.
Well, I'm actually thinking that like maybe because the show itself is a different format, right? Maybe you would not try to fit it into a 5-act play format, right? Maybe it becomes more like Shakespeare's poems, right? Where it's sort of this like epic poem, and each episode of The Mandalorian is a different poem, and you've got dialogue. I mean, Shakespeare and his poems had dialogue between characters and things like that. I don't know. It's a fun idea.
I just want to see more, because I think that your adaptations add a layer of understanding from a transformational work perspective that, it's through a Shakespearean lens, kind of like how Star Wars Lego is through a Lego window or something like that. But it adds this beautiful layer of understanding and transformation to the work, and I love it so much. So
thank you.
Thank you for writing these and digging into the characters and trying to get in their headspace, and then also writing them soliloquies for for their epic moments. I am still looking forward to the first live production when they actually are just like, yeah, sure, have the rights. That would be amazing, because I'm sure people want to do it, right? So, yeah, that's my hope. And also, when you write the first medieval Star Wars / Renaissance Star Wars actual teleplay where we have something way set in the past with actual Shakespearean dialogue, and it's all like a plot of Shakespeare, but like Star Wars. That's my goal. Is I'll advocate that for years. Be like, just let Ian write it. Go do it. Yeah. And I will advocate for comedies all the time, because I think that we need a little bit more uplift and joy and hope at the end of our Star Wars. Yeah. I
mean, that's actually why I think, I don't know, in some ways I almost feel like Star Wars is trapped by its name, right? Like, and why I appreciate that things like The Mandalorian are doing different things, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to necessarily be about.
It no longer has the Star Wars name in the title, right? So that was a deliberate choice, right? To no longer use Star Wars in there. It's now just they've moved that to like the production title, like it's a Star Wars production, but it's not actually Star Wars. And I think that opens up some freedom for them a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. And I think they're getting more comfortable with the idea that fans just love being in that world.
Yeah.
We don't need to have, epic space shootouts all the time. Of course we love them, but it doesn't have to be all the time. And and just being in that universe is it's just so fun, and it's sort of instantly recognizable too.
Nor do the stakes need to be galactic wide.
Right. That's right.
Sometimes personal stakes are just as emotional, etc. Yeah. We get that very clearly with Rebels, with the crew, with The Mandalorian, although Rogue One, but like the personal stories of, Rogue One, the team, and their sacrifice, etc. Like it doesn't necessarily need to be galactic wide. As long as it means something to the characters, it'll mean something to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I am looking forward to, like you point out, the new era of Star Wars and, all of the fun things that we're going into. We have so many amazing storytellers that are going to be taking on the reins. And it almost feels like we're entering a new age of Star Wars with the completion of the saga. And I'm looking forward to it too.
Yeah. I think we have a lot of exciting stuff ahead of us.
All right, Ian, where can people find you if they're looking for you and your work online?
Sure. So I am at Ian Doescher on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram. So I'm all around the socials. I've got a website, iandescher.com. I do have a Patreon page, which is, I think, patreon.com/Ian Doescher. So yeah, I'm all over the place. And people can get books, basically,
anywhere books are sold.
Ask your local bookstore, have them deliver it or drop it off at your house during this time. Of course, bigger places like Amazon and Barnes & Noble have them as well.
And if you go to the Globe Theatre in London, they're all there in the gift store.
That is correct, yes. The Globe has been very, very kind, as has the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust has been a super partner over the years.
I wonder if because I'm in Canada, I wonder if they sell them in Stratford, like for that festival there.
Yeah, well. I don't know.
They probably do. Yeah, I'm sure they do. Everybody probably sells your books that's like, hey, this is a good, way intro with stories that you already love.
I mean, I think Shakespeare people, anytime Shakespeare is made newly relevant, Shakespeare people enjoy it. And so I think there's, I think that's why these big, to me, huge cultural institutions that I feel like I don't have any business being a part of, they're so amazing. I feel like they see this benefit in it of like, see, it's like Shakespeare is modern again. And
yeah. And relevant, because Shakespeare would definitely write something like Star Wars.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm your host, Marie-Claire Gould. Our music is orchestral music by Christy Carew, composed for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force: Brad, Cheryl Bell, Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Susan, Felicia, How Rude, Anna Perez, Macau Mom, Neil, James, and Joe Allen D. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other podcast apps. It helps others find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, and our website where we have expanded our content, including reviews, metas, and articles at whattheforce.ca. You can also connect with us on our Discord. Links are in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers!